Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me once again. And folks, late last night at around 11 p.m., Jack Smith filed a scathing response to Donald Trump in the election interference case in Washington, D.C. As you folks know, recently Donald Trump filed a motion with the court to have Judge Tanya Chutkan, the judge assigned in the case, removed from the case entirely because, well, he thinks that she is biased against him and that she's not impartial. You know, obviously that's garbage. There's no evidence to support that, but Donald Trump pushed forward with it anyway. And, you know, he cited different statements that Judge Tanya Chutkan has made in cases involving January 6th rioters, and, you know, she wasn't being nice to them. So Donald Trump thinks that means she is biased against him. And while I'm almost certain that Donald Trump is not going to be successful in this move, Jack Smith responded, and man, he did not hold back. So here is Jack Smith's response to Donald Trump in United States of America v. Trump, and almost immediately, Jack Smith starts going into Donald Trump's arguments, debunking them, saying, quote, "There is no valid basis under the relevant laws and facts for the Honorable Tanya S. Chutkan, United States District Judge for the District of Columbia, to disqualify herself in the proceeding." And then immediately in the second paragraph, Jack Smith says, to support his claim, defendant Donald Trump cherry picks from portions of the court's sentencing of two individuals for their crimes related to the January 6th, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol. In both instances, the court was appropriately responding to and ultimately rejecting a common argument raised by scores of January 6th offenders, that they deserved leniency because their actions were inspired by or were not as serious as those of others who contributed to the riot but had not been held accountable, including former President Donald Trump, the defendant in this case. So here Jack Smith is just kind of giving us a preview of what arguments he's going to be making against Donald Trump and his motion to have Chutkan removed from the case. And, you know, he is right. You know, Donald Trump did cherry pick things, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. But almost immediately after, Jack Smith goes into Donald Trump's attempts to apply the wrong recusal standard. He says, in addition, the defendant attempts to apply the wrong recusal standard to the court's statements, where, as here, a recusal motion is based on statements made by a judge during judicial proceedings in response to facts and arguments placed before her. Recusal is warranted, quote, only in the rarest circumstances where the statements, quote, display a deep-sealed favoritism or antagonism that would make fair judgment impossible. And then he goes on to finish it off by saying the challenged statements fall well short of that mark. You know, what he's saying here is that, you know, there's a bar to reach to have a judge recused from a case, and, well, you know, Donald Trump doesn't reach that bar. And then Jack Smith begins to talk about the applicable law in this case, you know, what actually should be applied when we're talking about recusals. And he says in his motion, the defendant fails to mention that there is a presumption against recusal, set forth the proper legal standard for judicial recusal, or acknowledge the heightened standard that applies here because the defendant's claims are based solely on the court's comments arising and in the performance of its judicial duties. The reason for the defendant's omission is clear. He cannot meet these standards, so he seeks to elide them. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But yeah, I mean, you know, Donald Trump obviously knows, his lawyers are telling him that there's a standard to reach when you want a judge to be removed from a case, and you know, he specifically ignored those standards in his filing. Why? I mean, you know, we can take a pretty good guess as to why Donald Trump ignored those standards, because he can't reach them. You know, he doesn't have a claim that actually reaches that level to have Chutkan removed. I mean, you know, he just doesn't like her, right? You know, Chutkan hasn't played his game so far, so he doesn't like her, and, you know, he thinks that she's biased against him and all this crap. And then Jack Smith begins to go into why Donald Trump's filing was so bad. On the end of page 3, he says, the defendant's sole ground for recusal in this case is the court's statements made during formal proceedings in her courtroom in the course of her judicial duties. There is a higher standard for recusal based on such intrajudicial statements, that is, statements made by a judge while she is doing her job, because a judge's core duties include reviewing facts, responding to parties' arguments, and forming opinions, all while maintaining neutrality and fairness. And that's the thing, right? That is why, you know, Donald Trump's filing was so bad, because as you can see, this is the document that Trump filed in the court saying that these certain statements were biased, specifically this first one and this second one down here. But the problem with Trump's filing is that these were made while the judge was doing her job, right? And these statements are her repeating facts, her acknowledging the argument that people in front of her were making. This is not her giving her opinion. So there's a much higher bar to reach, because that's part of the judge's job, right? Dealing with the arguments that a defendant is making and, kind of repeating those facts and going over them. And that's all that Judge Chutkan was doing in this filing. These quotes are quite literally Judge Chutkan doing her job, but Trump is trying to claim in front of the court that, no, it's not, it's her being biased. And, Jack Smith is basically saying, no, you lunatic, that is how we work in the United States. That is the law. Anyway, back to Jack Smith's response. Then on page 8, he actually makes the argument that we were just kind of talking about a moment ago. He says, in 2 of the dozens of January 6th related sentencing over which this court has presided, the offenders being sentenced deployed a common strategy. They invoked the defendant, Donald Trump, and the mob on January 6th in their bid for sentencing reductions, arguing that the culpability of others, including the defendant, should reduce their own. The court responded to these arguments as required by law and rejected them. Now, the defendant, Donald Trump's motion seeks the court's recusal for its statements made while discharging this core judicial responsibility, claiming that the disqualifying statements undermine public confidence in the court's impartiality and demonstrate that the court has made prejudgments about the defendant. The court's prior judicial statements do no such thing. Instead, an objective look at them reveals that the defendant's motion takes the court's word out of context in order to manufacture allegations of bias. And, that's exactly what Donald Trump did in his filing. He took certain quotes and kind of cut off quotes to make it seem like Judge Chutkan was saying one thing, in reality she wasn't. She was saying another, and, she wasn't being biased at all. She was quite literally just addressing the arguments made by the January 6th insurrectionist in front of her. And then pretty much after this, Jack Smith dives into the arguments that Trump made, saying, of course he took them out of context and that it was part of Judge Chutkan's job and that, Trump doesn't reach the bar of recusal. And, this is really bad for Trump. This filing right here is perfectly done, very well written by Jack Smith. They really had their facts with them in this filing, as they always do. And, I'm just even more convinced after reading this that Donald Trump's motion to have Chutkan removed is going to be rejected and probably laughed out of court. And then Jack Smith wraps up his statement with a conclusion saying, the defendant has failed to identify anything approaching the clear and convincing evidence necessary to overcome the presumption of impartiality. Instead, he has relied on suggestion and innuendo to insinuate something sinister in the court, simply doing its job by addressing sentencing arguments. The court's comments, when viewed in context by a, quote, fully informed third-party observer, do not remotely display a deep-seated favoritism or antagonism, yada, yada, yada. So, obviously Jack Smith is just saying, yeah, Donald Trump's motion is BS. And he's right. He's right. So, yeah, that is Jack Smith's response. I think we can all agree that it's very strong. And, it's just so annoying how Trump and his lawyers keep filing these baseless motions in court, knowing that they're probably going to fail, in an attempt to either hopefully land a long shot, just hope something sticks one of these days, or, just to waste people's time, which equally is likely, I think, right? But yeah, Trump is going to get laughed out of court. Chutkan is staying on the case, whether Trump likes it or not. And again, I just find it hilarious how Donald Trump is having a meltdown over Judge Chutkan doing her job, right? She won't delay the trial for him because he's being treated like any other defendant, and Trump thinks that that's biased. He thinks that he being treated the same as anybody else is somehow biased. Doesn't make much sense. But anyway, folks, that is going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed. I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think about this and Jack Smith's response. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for watching, and I hope to speak to you soon.